Whether you're into true crime or not, you know how you sometimes have that one case or that one news story that just sticks in your brain and won't go away? That's this one for me. 28 years ago, a crime was committed. 27 years ago, 3 teens were convicted of those crimes. 10 years ago, those teens' sentences were completely suspended and they all walked out of prison free. And just a few weeks ago, this case popped back up in the news yet again. I am referring to the case of the West Memphis 3. The thing that's always fascinated me the most about this case is how it even snowballed into what it did. In short, like I said, 3 teens were arrested for a crime. They spent 18 years in prison for that crime, yet there wasn't a speck of DNA evidence. There was no motive for them to have committed these crimes. There was even highly questionable police work done during the investigation. So how then were they even arrested? How did this all start? Hey all, it's Linda. Welcome back to my channel. For today's video, this is another in my series that I call How It Started. So this is the case where you might know the end of a story. You might know bits and pieces in the middle of the story, but you don't know how it started, how it began, how it led up to that ending that everyone knows. I like to sit here and tell you all about how those stories started, the origins of them, and while I do that, I like to put some makeup on my face because it distracts me, okay? I'm not going to be talking about what makeup I'm using, but everything is going to be listed in the description box down below if you're interested. If you're into that idea, I would highly encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I'm putting out these videos every other Friday right now. Maybe that'll be more in the future, but I've really been loving doing these videos for all of you. I love the suggestions you've been sending me in the comments or on Instagram. You guys, I have quite a list going for these videos. I already have a few in the bank, so I'm just really excited to keep going. Now, I do have to say that today's story does have a true crime element to it. I am going to be touching on the crime. I feel like you kind of have to do that. But my focus is going to be on the events and the evidence that led up to the arrest of these teens and their eventual conviction. Like, how did they even get behind bars in the first place? This story, you're going to want to buckle in. This is a ride. I do want to warn you, though, that this video is going to contain topics that will be upsetting or distressing to some people, namely the topics of murder and especially the topics of murder to children. All of my sources are going to be linked in the description box down below, but let's jump right into this. As I mentioned, I do want to start by touching on the crime itself. So on May 5th, 1993, 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers were reported as missing. All 3 boys lived in West Memphis, Arkansas, and they were close friends. Now, they were allegedly last seen playing together that night around 6:30 p.m., but when they weren't home by 7 p.m., Chris's adopted father, John Mark Byers, reported them as missing to the police. And it may seem strange that it was only a half hour after they were supposed to be home before they were reported missing, but the boys all knew to be home by the time the street lamps came on, and they were really good about this. So if they weren't home when the street lamps came on, that means something was wrong. The police did search a bit that night, and so did family and friends and neighbors, but the really intensive search didn't start until the next day, May 6th, around 8:45 a.m. Most of the search was focused on Robin Hood Hills, and that's where the boys were reported as last seen. And despite a ton of people searching that area, like they formed a literal human chain, no sign of the boys was found at all. So around 1:45 p.m. on May the 6th, an officer spotted a shoe floating in a nearby creek that led to a major drainage canal in Robin Hood Hills. Police had said that Officer Mike Allen was the one who found the shoe, but it was actually juvenile probation officer Steve Jones. And when they started to search that specific area more in depth, they did find the bodies of the 3 boys. All 3 boys were found naked, and they were hogtied with their own shoelaces, right wrist tied to the right ankle, left wrist tied to the left ankle, behind their backs. Their clothing was later found in the creek, so it was sort of wrapped around sticks, which were then stuck into the mud in order to conceal them. So the autopsies later revealed that Chris Byers had died of multiple injuries, including castration, and Michael Moore and Stevie Branch had died of multiple injuries with drowning. Police initially suspected that the boys had been sexually assaulted, but later expert testimony disputed this. Of course, the police instantly launched into an investigation, and there was very little evidence at the scene. There was no blood, there was no fibers. It almost looked like the scene had been swept clean. Now, keeping in mind that this crime happened in 1993, almost immediately, it wasn't that strange that rumors started spreading that a satanic cult was responsible for the killings. The crime scene's location in the woods, the nature of the way the boys were tied, the nudity, all of it just started concerning concerns of Satanism amongst the locals. Only a few days after the murder, Chief Inspector Gary Gitchell informed the media and the public that authorities aren't ruling out anything in their investigation, including the possibility of gang or cult activity. The police and public latched onto that theory almost immediately, so much so that it overshadowed more traditional theories like that the boys had been killed by somebody who knew them. On June 3rd, 1993, less than a month after the boys' bodies had been found, 3 teens, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Miss Kelly Jr. were arrested for the murder of the 3 boys. So, what led police to these 3 teens? I'm going to be talking about the following in this video. Number 1, what led police in the first place to who they consider to be the ringleader, Damien Echols. The confession that served for the main reason of arresting these 3 teens. Testimony from another party who claims that they got an actual confession from one of the suspected murderers. And testimony from someone who claims to have seen them near the scene of the crime. First, as I mentioned, we are going to talk about Damien Echols. Now, Damien was born as Michael Wayne Hutcheson in 1974. Through his early childhood, his family moved frequently, and Damien had attended 8 different schools by the time he was 10 years old. When he was 13, he decided he wanted to change his last name to that of his stepfather, whose name was Jack Echols. So he was going to become Michael Wayne Echols, but at the same time, he figured, hey, this is a good time to change my first name too. So at the time, he was considering converting to Catholicism, so he decided he wanted to change his name to Damien, after the saint Father Damien, who worked a lot with lepers. The story really spoke to him, and he just liked the name. The family finally settled in West Memphis, Arkansas, and Damien later dropped out of school. He was arrested several times as a teen for petty crimes like vandalism or theft. Shoplifting, really. Now, these things alone were enough to kind of put him under the watchful eye of police, but again, this was during the height of the Satanic Panic, so Damien wore a whole lot of black, he liked to listen to metal music, he loved him some Metallica, and he also observed the Wiccan faith, so they were especially alert to him because of this. Now, in May of 1992, so this is about a year before the murders took place, Damien was 17 and he was dating a 15-year-old named Deanna Holcomb. Now, they were teenagers, and guess what? They were having sex. Shocker, I know. But Deanna's mother really didn't like this. She didn't like Damien, and she essentially told Deanna that they were forbidden to be together and that she was refusing to let her date Damien. So Damien and Deanna decided that they were going to run away. So they ran away, they found an unoccupied trailer, and they entered in through an unlocked door, and then again, they did what teenagers do. They started having sex. Once Deanna's mother noticed that she was missing and noticed that her daughter was a runaway, she reported it to police, and Damien and Deanna didn't do a very good job, apparently, of concealing themselves or their location, so they were found pretty quickly by police. They were found by Officer Stone, who entered the trailer and claimed to find the teens in a state of undress. So they were both charged with burglary and sexual misconduct. Now, after they were arrested, they were taken to the county jail, and an arrest report was filed out for Damien by Officer Stone, and Officer Stone contacted a juvenile intake officer named Jerry Driver. Now, Jerry Driver had only been named the chief juvenile officer about 3 months prior to meeting Damien, and before that, he spent 20 years in the airline business, flying cargo runs from Miami to Haiti. And he tried to start a few new businesses along the way, but they just never really lasted. Jerry said that because of his trips to Haiti, he had become very familiar with voodoo, and to be honest, he was pretty obsessed with the idea of Satanism and the occult and cults in general. Much of this, though, was due to the Satanic Panic that was going on at the time. And if you're interested in learning more about the Satanic Panic, I do have another video on this. I'll leave it linked in the description box down below. But it affected so many people in so many different ways, and Jerry Driver was just one of the people it affected. So according to Jerry Driver's assistant, Officer Steve Jones, You remember him? He's the one who found the shoe in the water. We'll get back to him in a little bit. He and Jerry Driver would actually drive around town when there was a full moon looking for people committing child sacrifices. I'm going to stop for a second and let that one sink in, that an officer of the law was driving around by the light of the full moon looking for people sacrificing children. Okay.
Sure, Jan.
Now, according to Jones, they never found any evidence of satanic cult activity. Funny that. So because of Jerry Driver's interest on the subject, he began consulting with a man by the name of Dr. Dale Griffiths, and Dr. Griffiths was a retired police officer who had established a second career as a full-time consultant on matters of Satanism and the occult. According to Jerry Driver, when he picked up Damien began telling him that he had an interest in the occult, but not as a devil worshiper, but said instead that he was a gray witch. Driver claimed that Damien told him he had several people participate with him in these activities, such as his good friend Jason Baldwin. Driver said that Damien told him he knew of 3 to 4 cults in West Memphis, and they had performed animal sacrifices, but the next logical step was to move on to sacrificing a human. All of this came from Jerry Driver's later reports and testimony. He said Damien didn't want to give the names of anyone in these cults, and that just pissed Jerry Driver off. Damien would later claim that he was feeding stories to Jerry Driver, and to be honest, it's kind of a dick move, but if you're an angsty teenager, okay, you're already pretty angsty, and you just got busted for having sex with your girlfriend, like, wouldn't you be a little pissed too, and maybe, I don't know, just be a little angry at police? I guess I would. I can't blame him. Now, Jerry Driver began consulting with Dale Griffiths, not just about Satanism and the occult, but about Damien Echols specifically. Keep in mind that this is all a year before the murders. Now, several months after Damien's arrest took place from his running away, he was extremely depressed. He and Deanna say that they were really in love, and Damien was really depressed. So he went and lived with his birth father for a little while in Oregon, but the police were called to the house when they were told that Damien was suicidal. Damien voluntarily went with his family that day to a psychiatric hospital, and in the police report of the incident, they mentioned no violence, they mentioned no real disturbance at all at the scene. That same day, Jerry Driver, who, keep in mind, was still in Arkansas at this time, and Damien was in Oregon, he spoke with Damien's father, and then he called the psychiatric hospital on his own and told them that Damien had threatened his father and threatened to slit his throat and eat him. Damien's father denies ever saying this, but either way, it doesn't matter because at this point, that's what's on Damien's hospital intake record. So whether it was true or not, whether it happened or not, that is on his record. Damien wound up staying at that hospital for about 2 days and then went back to Arkansas. Now, a few months later, in December of '92, Jerry Driver said he was looking for a car with a drunk driver that just happened to be in the exact same area, in the exact same trailer park where Damien Echols lived. And as he was looking for this drunk driver, he saw 3 teens walk by. They were in long, dark robes. They had staffs with them, or long sticks. And he identified these teens as Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Miskelly. He also claimed that he had seen the 3 of them together 2 or 3 times in places like Walmart or the trailer park, things like that, but that he was always seeing Damien and Jason together. That drunk driver, the driver said that he was looking for where Damien lived, well, shockingly, they were never found. It's almost like Jerry Driver was just driving around angry and wound up near where Damien lived looking for something to be upset about. Basically, Jerry Driver was highly focused on Damien Echols long before these murders even took place. Now, remember how I said that Steve Jones, who was Jerry Driver's assistant, found that first shoe from the boys in the water? Well, what was a bit strange is that Steve Jones worked in another district entirely. He didn't even work in West Memphis. He worked in Marion, which was the next town over. Steve Jones was not a part of the search team looking for the boys. He entered the woods alone that day, on his own. He stumbled over to the shoe. Again, he was alone this whole time, but then he called for the other searchers to come and join him and see what he had found. Once the boys' bodies started to be pulled from the water, Jones looked directly at one of his colleagues and said that Damien Echols, that dark, moody teenager from Lake Hills, he had finally killed somebody. Again, I have to state that he was saying this as the boys' bodies were being pulled from the water for the first time. It's genuinely hard to find the source of the person who said that Steve Jones said this to them, but no matter what, that quote has circulated a lot at this point, and the fact of the matter is that Jones did have his eye on Damien Echols. He spoke these words before there was evidence, before there was anything. So the day after the murders, Jones even told someone that out of all the people he knew that were members of the occult, assuming that he knew so many members of the occult, that only one person came to his mind that he believed was capable of such a crime, and that's Damien Echols. Now, the day after the murders, 24 hours after the bodies had been found, Officer Jones and Officer Sudbury went to Damien's house to interview him. At this point, the police knew nothing. They didn't know the time of death. They didn't know the cause of death. They knew nothing. And much of the report that Steve Jones had filed after interviewing Damien, we're just talking about his appearance, like his clothes, his hair, and they even mentioned that he had a pentagram tattoo on his chest. He did not have a pentagram tattoo on his chest, so we're not sure where that came from, but let's move on. So at this point, the only news that was public was that these boys' bodies had been found. Damien claims that Steve Jones was asking him very leading questions, such as, so why do you think they would have put the bodies in the water like that? And he would say things like, so do you think that the killer did this because they wanted this to happen? And Damien would be like, maybe. I'm sorry, by the way, if you can hear this. My neighbors have started mowing their lawn, so bear with me. Now, police in West Memphis had started going door to door, asking people if they had seen anything, if they had heard anything. So they were starting to go to other people to see what they knew. But it was like Steve Jones was doing his own personal investigation just straight into Damien Echols. Again, less than 24 hours after the bodies had been found. Now, let's consider the alternative for a minute. Is it possible that Steve Jones knew so much about Damien that the minute he saw these crimes, the minute he saw what was going on and the nature of these crimes, that he knew accurately that it was Damien Echols and it was in fact Damien? Of course, that is possible. I can't say that that's not a possibility, but is it likely? No, it is not. On May 9th, a few days after the murders, Officer Shane Griffin went to interview Damien again. But this time, Damien was hanging out at his friend Jason Baldwin's house, and he was hanging out with his girlfriend, Dominique Tier. In addition to questioning Damien this time, they also started questioning Jason. Now, it's worth noting that Jason at this time did also have some, nicks on his record from minor trouble that he had with the law, with petty crimes and things like that. And his probation officer was none other than Officer Steve Jones. Here are some of the questions that were asked of the boys. Did you kill these boys? Do you know who did? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to kill someone? Do you believe in white or black magic? Why would your fingerprints be at the scene? Now, I have to admit that this question originally kind of pissed me off because I was like, obviously, like I said, there were no fingerprints found at the scene, so why would they insert this question? But I feel like this happens a whole lot as a way of police getting people to admit to a crime, right? But I still don't like it. I don't like it. In the middle of Jason's interview, his mother came home and they were standing on the lawn being questioned, and she put the kibosh on that interview real quick. She didn't like the line of questioning. She stopped the interview dead in its tracks. So I feel like now at this point, you can see how police were initially led to suspect Damien Echols. His past record, his past dealings with Jerry Driver and Officer Steve Jones, and even Steve Jones uttering at the crime scene, "Oh, Damien Echols did it." But just feeling like someone could commit a crime shouldn't be enough to convict them or even arrest them, right? So it's important that we look at several things that led up to their arrest, but most importantly, the confession of Jessie Miss Kelly Jr. Now, Jessie had also dropped out of high school, and while he didn't have an arrest record, he did kind of have a record of being known on his high school campus of kind of being a bully, and he had a severe temper and was just known for getting into fistfights a lot. Damien and Jason were known to be close friends, and they knew Jessie from school, and they've always said that if they had seen him maybe at the pool hall or in the trailer park, that they would stop. They'd talk to him, they'd see how he was doing, but it's not like they hung out all the time. Damien and Jason were very close friends, but Jessie Miss Kelly was not a part of that group. Now, on May 15th, 1993, this is about a week after the murders, Jessie and his friends were at a local bowling alley, and they called police saying that they had seen a man chasing 3 young boys that were about 8 years old. They also said that this same man approached Jessie and his friends, offering to let them drink in his cabin, which was in the nearby woods. When the police arrived, Jessie and his friends all pointed their fingers at a man who was there named Tracy Laxton. They said that Laxton had tried to lure these boys into the woods, but ultimately Laxton was investigated and he was completely cleared. All accusations of any kind were dismissed and he was completely cleared. Now, Jessie stated later that at this point he didn't even know that these murders had happened, but that he was just trying to report Laxton because he felt like he was suspicious. It was at this point that police kind of started to keep an eye on Jessie as well and feel like he was acting a little strange. Now, on June 3rd, 1993, Jessie was brought in and interrogated by police officers Gary Gitchell and Detective Ridge. Jessie had an IQ of 72, which made him borderline on the adult intelligence scale. This is just one step above the lowest classification of extremely low mental intelligence. Jessie was questioned alone. Even though he was 17, his parents were not present. Now, Jessie's father did give permission for Jessie to go with the police, but did not give them permission specifically to question him. Originally, Jessie was not even actually suspected of committing the crime. He wasn't suspected as being of any part of it, but he had started giving some kind of like vague explanations and just guesses on who might have committed the crime. Police informed him that there was a $35,000 reward, that if Jessie gave them information that he knows, his family could be eligible for that $35,000. And Jessie and his family were living in, some lower circumstances, so that $35,000 probably looked really juicy to him. That day, Jessie was questioned for up to 12 hours, but only 2 segments of that 12 hours were recorded, and those segments totaled about 46 minutes. Let me say that again. After 12 hours of interrogation, only 46 minutes are on tape. We don't have any proof of what was said over those other 11 hours and 14 minutes. Now, I will say that some of the details I'm about to talk about from Jessie's tapings, from the confession, they are going to be disturbing. When Jessie spoke, he told officers that he had received a call early in the morning of May 5th, 1993 from Jason Baldwin, and Jason had asked him to go to Robin Hood Hills with he and Damien. He claimed that in those woods, he came across the 3 boys, Stevie, Michael, and Christopher. Jessie went on to claim that while they were there, he saw Damien hit one boy real bad, and then he started screwing them and stuff. When photos of the 3 boys were laid in front of Jessie, Jessie pointed to a photo of Chris Byers as the one who Damien did this to, but said that he thought his name was Michael Moore. So there was a little bit of confusion there, but he was pointing at a photo of Chris Byers. Jessie said that Damien hit Chris with his fist and started bruising him up, and then Jason turned around and hit Stevie Branch. He then said that Michael Moore took off running, so then Jessie, chased after him and held him down until Damien and Jason came, and then when he did, Jessie said that he got up and left. He said that when he left, the boys already had their clothes off, and that Damien and Jason beat up the boys real bad and tied them up, and again, he says they started screwing them and stuff and cutting them. Let me again state that it was later proven that the boys were not sexually assaulted. Jessie again just kept reiterating that he left. These things were being done to the boys. He saw it, but he left. He said he couldn't stand to see what was being done to the boys. He claimed that Jason had a knife that was used to cut one of the little boys in the face and another on the bottom. And Jessie claimed that they were in the park around 9 a.m., but then he adjusted that to be around noon. He said that the boys had skipped school, and that's why they were in the park around noon. It was later discovered that all 3 boys were in school all day that day, but let's move on. I have to say, reading the transcript of Jessie's interview is hard. I have it linked down below if you want to read it, but I personally feel that it is textbook police coercion. Let's listen to a few examples. So here is the direct audio from Jessie's interrogation. I have added subtitles directly from the police transcript of that audio. So these subtitles did not come from me. These did come directly from the police transcript.
Okay, you've been down there in those woods before. Can you describe to me what in those woods, what's the location where you were? Is there a path you go down?
Down no path.
All right.
So did you see there how Jessie is essentially parroting back to Detective Ridge what he feels. Ridge suggests, oh, there's a little path, and Jessie says, yeah, there's a path. Things like that. Let's listen to another one. Remember how I said that Jessie said one of the little boys was cut on his bottom?
All right. Another boy was cut, I understand. Where was he cut at?
At the bottom.
On his bottom? Was he face down and he was cutting on him, or?
Now, you talking about bottom, do you mean right here? In his groin area? Okay. So
you know what his penis is?
Yeah, that's where it was cut at.
Notice that Jessie did not offer the information about the groin area being cut. Jessie even said that one of the boys who was being cut was face down until he was said, wait a minute, do you know what his penis is? And he's like, yeah, I mean his penis. That's where he was cut. So again, it's hard to listen to, but all the information is going to be in the description box down below. I would love for you to listen yourself and you be the judge. Now, shortly after Jessie's original confession, police arrested Jessie Misskelley, Damien Echols, and Jason Baldwin for the murders. Notice I said original confession. Well, that's because Jessie would go on to make another confession, but then he recanted all of his confession. But then he made another confession, but then he recanted that. He went back and forth until finally he recanted all of it and said that it didn't happen and he was being coerced by police. Whether you think that Jessie's confession was true or not, I would love to hear your thoughts. Jessie's confession was, of course, the biggest piece of damning evidence for all three of them. Another important piece of evidence, though, was testimony that was given by Vicki Hutcheson. So Vicki was a new resident of West Memphis, and she was friends with Jessie Misskelley. Now, on May 6th, 1993, this is the day that the bodies were found, Vicki was at the West Memphis Police Department, and she was taking a polygraph test to see whether or not she stole money from her West Memphis employer. So that had nothing to do with the murder. She just already happened to be at the police department for this. Now, Vicki's 8-year-old son, Aaron, was present with her at the polygraph test, and Aaron had been a friend of the 3 West Memphis boys who had been killed. During the polygraph, Aaron started telling police detectives that the boys who had been killed were killed at the playhouse. The bodies were later found sort of near where Aaron had described, so he even led them to the area, but no playhouse was found. When detectives were asking Aaron for more details, he claimed he had witnessed the murders and that they were committed by Satanists who spoke Spanish. His statements were wildly inconsistent, and they kept growing kind of more and more elaborate each time. And later, when he was shown photographs of Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley, he couldn't even pick them out of a photo lineup, any of them, but he did point to other people saying definitively it was them. This might sound familiar, like the case of the McMartin school trial in the Satanic Panic era, when students were pointing to pictures of actor Chuck Norris as the ones who abused them. Now again, there was no playhouse found, so why would what Aaron said even matter? Well, a police officer decided to leak part of Aaron's story to the press, and this contributed to the growing belief that these crimes were committed by somebody that was interested in the occult or in Satanism. On June 1st, 1993, Vicki agreed to let police place microphones in her house where she was going to have an encounter with Damien Echols. She said that Jessie knew Damien and was going to invite Damien over to her house. So they sat around and Vicki started talking to him about the occult and about, religion and things like that. And Damien wasn't really participating in the conversation at all and, didn't really admit to doing anything or, talked about the occult. And later, when Vicki took these recordings to the police, they said, oh, these are completely inaudible. You can't hear anything. But Vicki swears that you could hear everything very clearly. The next day on June 2nd, Vicki told police that about 2 weeks after the murders had taken place, she, Damien, and Jessie had attended an SBOT. This is a meeting where Wiccans gather, and that Damien had bragged drunkenly that, yes, he killed those boys. She wasn't able to tell police the location of the SBOT, anybody else who was there, any details about it, nothing at all. It's no coincidence that the day after Vicki told this to the police, Jessie Misskelley was brought in for the questioning that would ultimately lead him to confess. Vicki was later brought in to give testimony at Jessie Misskelley's trial, and she gave testimony saying that she had personal knowledge that Jason, Damien, and Jessie were all involved in the occult. So her testimony was considered to be absolutely crucial to the prosecution since there were admittedly no signs of any physical evidence linking these teens to the crime. Later in 2004, Vicki said about her testimony, "Every word was a lie." She later recounted all of her testimony, saying that she was coerced and threatened by police and that they were saying they were going to take away her son. Regarding the S-Bot, she claims that police had coached her on what to say before she even started talking. Now, police, on the other hand, say that she was eager to play a starring role in the investigation and that she was perhaps hoping to claim a bit of that hefty reward money. A detective described her role as saying that she was trying to play detective because she thought that Damien was involved in devil worship and she thought it might be connected to the murders. Even her son Aaron, who was 8 at the time, when he was 18, he participated in an interview where he basically admitted that he was no longer sure of whether he was actually a witness to the murders or whether his mind was just playing tricks on him during a period of severe trauma to losing his friends. So far we have 2 investigators who had their eye on Damien from the beginning. So we have a confession that was later recanted, and you can hear evidence of police coercion in the interview. We have somebody who says that Damien was a part of the occult and he confessed to doing it, but then she came back and said every word was a lie. So with no physical evidence, something that would be helpful would be if there was a witness that if they didn't see the crime like Jessie claimed he did, and they didn't get a confession of the crime like Vicki claims that she did, maybe they saw the teens near the crime scene, right? And they could place the teens there at the time of the crime. Enter Narlene Hollingsworth. Now, Narlene was a well-known resident of West Memphis, and she came forward with quite a story and quite a recounting of the activities of May 5th, which is the day that the boys went missing. She claimed that she was in the car with all of her children, and there were several, as well as one of her children's girlfriends, and that they saw 3 boys on 2 bicycles. So maybe one boy was riding one and the other one was riding the second, with the third boy, like, you know how sometimes they stand on like the lug nuts of the back wheel and hold on? That's what she claimed she saw. Now, Narlene said that one of the boys was a little heavy set, which is strange because all of the boys were very slight in frame, and she described the heavy set boys' clothes in great detail, but none of those clothes matched what the victims had been wearing. She claimed her son's girlfriend immediately recognized Stevie Branch as one of the boys, and Narlene said that she told the boys they ought to go home, and they responded with, "No, we're going to go play for a while." Now, she said that later that night, sometime around 9 p.m., her Aunt Dixie asked her to be picked up from the laundromat where she worked. The family all crowded into the car, and while the exact count of who was in the car varied from account to account, it seems likely that there were between 6 and 8 people in the car, in a 1982 Ford Escort wagon. This seems like a lot of people to be in one car, but then again, you know, it was the 90s, the early 90s, like we piled people into cars. Now, the story from everyone that was in that car, it sort of varied from account to account, but the basic story that they all agreed on for the most part was that they were traveling near the Robin Hood Hills area and that they saw Damien Echols and his girlfriend Dominique Tier walking along the road. They were both wearing black and they were both muddy. Narlene was very sure she saw them around 9:40 p.m. because we had our watches and we knew what time it was, but the rest of the car's inhabitants were uncertain of the time, or some of them uncertain of even the date. One of the people in the car swore that it was May 6th and then later was like, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was mistaken, it was May 5th. Narlene swore 100% that it was Damien and Dominique, but her son Ricky, who was in the passenger seat, said he remembered seeing 2 people, but couldn't say who they were for sure. And Narlene claimed that Ricky was scared somebody was going to kill him if he told. Now, this was the first time that Dominique had ever been presented as a possibility, like as a part of the crime, but the prosecution tried to say that maybe they actually saw Jason with Damien, because both Dominique and Jason, they both had a slight frame and they both had longer hair that had some wave to it, so maybe they were mistaken. But no, Narlene swears 100%. I know that was Dominique. I've known her since, when she was born, and she even said, "I wouldn't change my story if I was dying." Now, on the stand, Narlene's credibility was definitely questioned. Her Aunt Dixie said that Narlene will exaggerate everything. Narlene's brother-in-law said she was interested only in the reward money. Narlene herself was quoted as saying that she was just born to know things. She claimed that shortly before they ran into Damien and Domini, that she started to feel sick. Her gut was turning, something was wrong, and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we see Damien and Domini over there, and then as soon as they drove past him, the feeling was so intense that she had to pull over to throw up. Now, mind you, she didn't actually throw up, but she really felt like she had to, but, they just kept on going. In the years since the trials, her testimony has raised many eyebrows, and the amount of details that changed each time that she spoke had many people questioning her motives overall. Now, of course, at the trials, there were many other arguments presented. Jessie Misskelley was tried separately from Damien and Jason, and those two were tried together. Each trial lasted about a month, and all three were found guilty. Jessie and Jason were sentenced to life in prison, and Damien Echols was sentenced to death. Now, these teens sat in prison for over 18 years. All three appealed their convictions, and new evidence was even found after these convictions. Some of the new evidence that was found was teeth imprints on their boys that were shown to not match any of the three teens that were in prison for these crimes. Then there was Vicki Hutcheson recanting her testimony entirely. And in 2007, DNA collected from the crime scene was tested, and it matched none of the three teens that were in prison for this. Despite all this new evidence, request after request for a retrial was denied. In late 2010, the case was brought up to the Arkansas Supreme Court, and in August of 2011, after 18 years and 78 days in prison, all three teens were released from prison. This happened as part of a plea deal for something called the Alford plea. Now, the Alford plea essentially allows the defendants to plead guilty while still maintaining their innocence. Basically, they're saying that the prosecution may have enough evidence against them to convict them, but they get to maintain their innocence. Damien and Jason have never stopped fighting to be named truly innocent. Jessie has sort of hidden himself from the spotlight and gone a bit into seclusion and has not dealt with the case at all since being released. Damien especially, though, has been looking to get the DNA that was found in 2007. He wants it to be retested because we have had so many advancements that even the tiniest bits of DNA can be tested now in 2021, and they couldn't be tested in 2007. Well, just a few weeks ago, in the beginning of July 2021, the West Memphis Police Department announced that all of the evidence from the case, all of the DNA from the case, had been destroyed in a fire. This is really a devastating blow to the whole case, because whether that DNA would have convicted Jessie, Damien, and Jason, whether it would have convicted someone else, no matter what, the end of the story is that these three little boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, Chris Byers, they all deserve some form of justice. They deserve for their killer or killers to be brought to justice. And the chances of that happening now, that all of that DNA has been destroyed, it's slim to none. So that also means that the chances of Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley being completely cleared for the crime, slim to none. I have watched countless documentaries, listened to endless amounts of podcasts, done so much research on this case, and it's the beginning that always fascinates me the most, because you have this case where there was no DNA at first. There was nothing found. They were able to eventually test maybe something on the boys' faces. There was no DNA found to convict these boys of this murder. My personal belief, and you are more than welcome to present your own beliefs in the comments respectfully, please, is that Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley are completely innocent of this crime and that they had absolutely nothing to do with it. I do feel like there was a strong bias, both by West Memphis police and by the residents of West Memphis, that led these teens to be arrested and eventually convicted for these crimes. I also believe that the Satanic Panic had a whole lot to do with it. People were looking for someone to blame. They were looking for Satanism everywhere they went, and here come these boys dressed in black, listening to some Metallica. I don't know. I just feel like it was wrong place at the wrong time. And by wrong time, I mean the wrong time in history. So that's it. I know that this was a long one, so I'm sorry for that. I hope you had a snack in between. I hope you're doing okay. I have to say that not all of these How It Started videos are going to have a true crime aspect to them, but I feel like in some of these cases, the beginning and showing how it even got to that point is just so important and is almost more fascinating than the crime itself. I would love to know your thoughts down below, how you feel about this case. who you feel maybe is responsible for the murder of these 3 boys. Again, I do ask you to please be respectful in the comments. You're more than welcome to voice opposing opinions, but just be respectful. As I mentioned before, these videos will be coming out every other Friday, so I would absolutely love if you to subscribe. We do have some videos that are on the lighter end of things and some videos that are on the much darker end of things, so please stay tuned. But that's it. You can all follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Those are all GlitterFallout, and as always and forever, you are super freaking rock stars, and I love you so much with my whole heart, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.